The morning sun cast long shadows across the outdoor shooting range as 8-year-old Emma Martinez carefully walked between the target stands, her small hands gripping a clipboard that seemed almost too big for her. Her father, Sergeant First Class Roberto Martinez, had been bringing her to the Fort Bragg training facility every Saturday for the past 6 months, not to shoot, but to help with the mundane task of resetting paper targets between training sessions. Emma loved these Saturday mornings more than anything else in her young life. While other children her age were sleeping in or watching cartoons, she was surrounded by the controlled chaos of military training. The sharp crack of rifle fire had become as familiar to her as her mother's lullabies. She knew the difference between the sound of an M4 carbine and an M16A4 just by listening and could spot a bullseye hit from 50 yards away. Her job was simple but important. Between each group of trainees, she would walk down the range with her clipboard, marking down which targets needed replacing and carefully pulling down the torn paper to make way for fresh ones. The soldiers always waited patiently for her to finish, many of them amused by the serious expression on her face as she went about her work with military precision that would have made any drill sergeant proud. Roberto watched his daughter from the range master's booth with a mixture of pride and amazement. After his wife Maria had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier, Emma had become his anchor. The little girl had handled the loss with a maturity that sometimes frightened him, and these range days had become their special time together. He could see how much she loved being part of this world, even in her small way. On this particular Saturday, the range was busier than usual. A group of Navy SEALs had arrived the night before for joint training exercises, and they were scheduled to use the facility after the regular Army units finished their qualifications. Emma had heard whispers about the SEALs from the other soldiers, and she found herself stealing glances at these legendary warriors as they prepared their equipment near the parking area. The SEALs were different from the regular soldiers she was used to seeing. They moved with a quiet confidence. Their gear was pristine yet well used, and there was an intensity about them that even an 8-year-old could sense. Their leader, Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan, was a tall man with weathered hands and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He had noticed Emma during their brief safety orientation, watching as she efficiently reset targets with the focus of someone much older. As the morning progressed, Emma completed her rounds between the Army qualification courses. Each group of soldiers would fire their allotted rounds, she would reset the targets, and the next group would take their positions. It was a rhythm she had perfected over months of practice. The soldiers had grown fond of the determined little girl, often joking that she was the most reliable member of the range crew. During a break between sessions, Emma was kneeling beside a particularly stubborn target that had gotten tangled in the wind when she heard footsteps approaching behind her. She turned to see Chief Sullivan walking toward her, his rifle slung across his chest and a curious expression on his face. "You've been doing this for a while," he said, his voice carrying the distinctive calm authority that marked experienced special operations personnel. Emma nodded, suddenly feeling shy. She had heard enough stories about SEALs to know she was talking to someone truly special. 6 months, she managed to say, her voice barely audible over the distant sound of ongoing training. "Your father is Sergeant Martinez?" Sullivan asked, having made the connection during the morning briefings. "Yes, sir," Emma replied, unconsciously straightening her posture in a way that made Sullivan smile. "He's told us about you. Says you're the best range assistant he's ever worked with." Emma's face lit up with pride. She hadn't known her father talked about her work to the other soldiers, let alone to Navy SEALs. "I try to do my best, sir. The soldiers need clean targets to practice with." Sullivan studied the little girl for a moment, impressed by her seriousness and dedication. In his 15 years of military service, he had seen plenty of children around military bases, but there was something different about Emma. She wasn't just playing at being part of the military community. She genuinely understood the importance of what she was doing, even if her role seemed small. "Tell me," Sullivan said, settling into a crouch so he could speak to Emma at eye level. "Do you know what those soldiers are practicing for?" Emma considered the question carefully. "They're learning to protect people," she said finally. "My daddy says that every shot they take here might save lives someday." The answer surprised Sullivan with its insight. Most adults couldn't articulate the purpose of military training with such clarity. "That's exactly right," he said. "And your job, making sure they have good targets to practice with, is part of that same mission." As they talked, other members of Sullivan's SEAL team began to gather nearby, preparing for their own range time. They had overheard parts of the conversation and were equally intrigued by the young girl who took her volunteer job so seriously. These were men who had seen combat in some of the world's most dangerous places, yet they found themselves charmed by Emma's earnest dedication to her small but important role. Emma noticed the other SEALs watching and felt a flutter of nervousness. She had never been the center of attention from so many elite soldiers at once, but Chief Sullivan's calm presence helped her feel more at ease, and she found herself answering their questions about her work with growing confidence. "How do you know which targets need replacing?" asked Petty Officer First Class Mike Torres, genuinely curious about her process. "You have to look at the pattern of holes," Emma explained, warming to the subject. "If there are too many holes close together, or if the paper is torn too much, it's hard for the soldiers to see where their new shots hit. So those targets need to be changed." The SEALs exchanged glances, impressed by her understanding of the practical aspects of marksmanship training. This wasn't just busy work to keep a child occupied. Emma had developed a real appreciation for the technical requirements of effective practice. As the conversation continued, Emma found herself relaxing completely. These intimidating special operations warriors were treating her like a colleague, asking her opinions about range conditions and listening seriously to her answers. She had never felt more important or more valued for her contributions. The morning was about to take an unexpected turn that would change everything for the determined little girl who had found her place in the military community through the simple act of resetting paper targets. Chief Sullivan was beginning to form an idea, one that would soon present Emma with an opportunity she could never have imagined. Chief Sullivan looked at his watch and then back at Emma, who was still kneeling beside the target she had been working to untangle. An idea was forming in his mind, one that went against every regulation he could think of, but felt absolutely right in the moment. He had spent years training young recruits, and he recognized something special in this 8-year-old girl that many seasoned soldiers lacked. "Emma," he said thoughtfully, "how would you like to see what it's like on the other side of the targets?" She looked up at him with confusion. "Sir? Would you like to see what the range looks like from the firing line?" Emma's eyes widened with excitement. But she quickly looked toward the rangemaster's booth where her father was coordinating the morning's activities. "I don't think I'm allowed to do that, sir. I'm supposed to stay behind the safety line." Sullivan nodded approvingly. The fact that she immediately thought about safety rules and her father's instructions showed the kind of discipline that couldn't be taught. What if your father gave permission? And what if you had proper supervision? Before Emma could answer, Sullivan was already walking toward the rangemaster's booth. His team members watched with interest, recognizing the look on their chief's face. When Jake Sullivan got an idea about training or mentoring, it usually turned into something memorable. Roberto Martinez looked up as the SEAL chief approached his station. As a career Army NCO, he had worked with special operations personnel before and had developed a healthy respect for their unconventional methods. Still, he wasn't prepared for what Sullivan was about to propose. "Sergeant Martinez," Sullivan began, "your daughter has been asking some very intelligent questions about marksmanship training. I'd like to show her what the firing line looks like, if you're comfortable with that." Roberto's first instinct was to say no. The firing line was no place for a child, even one as responsible as Emma. But something in Sullivan's tone suggested this was more than just casual interest. "What exactly did you have in mind, Chief?" "Nothing dangerous," Sullivan assured him. "I'd like to show her how we set up for precision shooting, explain what we're looking for in a target, maybe let her look through a scope. Educational purposes only." Roberto considered the request. He knew his daughter's fascination with the military went far beyond just helping out at the range. She asked endless questions about tactics, equipment, and the purpose behind everything she observed. Perhaps it was time to let her see a bit more of the world she was so curious about. "She doesn't leave your direct supervision," Roberto said finally. "And the first sign of any safety issue, she comes straight back here." "Understood," Sullivan replied. "I'll treat her like any other trainee under my command." When Emma learned that her father had given permission for her to visit the firing line, she could barely contain her excitement. She had spent months watching the soldiers from a distance, wondering what it felt like to be behind the rifle instead of downrange replacing targets. Now she was about to find out. Sullivan led her to the firing position where his team had set up their equipment. The difference in perspective was immediately striking to Emma. From here, the targets she had been working with all morning looked impossibly small and distant. She couldn't imagine how anyone could hit something so far away with such precision. "The first thing you need to understand," Sullivan explained as he knelt beside his rifle, "is that shooting isn't about the gun. It's about the person behind it. The rifle is just a tool." Emma listened intently as he described the fundamentals of marksmanship. She learned about breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, and the mental discipline required for precision shooting. Sullivan was surprised by how quickly she grasped concepts that often took adult trainees weeks to master. "Can I look through the scope?" Emma asked, her voice filled with wonder. Sullivan carefully positioned her behind his rifle, ensuring she was safely clear of all controls and mechanisms. When Emma first looked through the high-powered optic, she gasped audibly. The target that had seemed impossibly distant to her naked eye now appeared close enough to touch. "I can see exactly which holes are from today and which ones are old," she said excitedly. "And I can see that target number 7 needs to be replaced because there's a tear in the corner that I missed from down there." Her observation impressed the entire SEAL team. She had identified a target issue that none of them had noticed from the firing line, demonstrating the kind of attention to detail that marked professional shooters. "You have good eyes," commented Petty Officer Torres. "That's the most important thing a marksman can have." For the next hour, Emma received an informal education in precision shooting from some of the military's most elite warriors. They showed her different types of ammunition, explained how wind and distance affected bullet trajectory, and described the mathematics behind long-range shooting. Emma absorbed every detail, asking questions that revealed her growing understanding of the complex science behind accurate shooting. As the morning progressed, word spread among the other soldiers about the impromptu training session taking place at the SEAL position. Many of them gathered nearby, amused and impressed by the sight of the little girl receiving instruction from the legendary Special Operations team. Emma, completely absorbed in learning, was oblivious to the attention she was attracting. Chief Sullivan found himself increasingly impressed by Emma's natural aptitude. She had an intuitive understanding of the relationship between the shooter, the rifle, and the target that many trained soldiers never developed. Her questions were insightful, her observations were accurate, and her respect for the weapons and their purpose was absolute. "Chief," said one of his team members quietly, "you know what you're thinking and you know it's crazy." Sullivan looked at Emma, who was carefully examining a piece of spent brass casing while asking detailed questions about ballistics. The idea that had been forming in his mind all morning was indeed crazy by any conventional standard. But conventional standards didn't always apply when you encountered someone truly exceptional. Sometimes crazy is exactly what's needed, he replied. As the official SEAL training session approached, Sullivan faced a decision that would go far beyond the normal boundaries of military training protocol. Looking at Emma's eager face and remembering her thoughtful questions about the purpose behind their training, he realized that this moment called for something extraordinary. The other soldiers on the range had noticed the unusual scene and were beginning to gather closer, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Emma remained focused on learning, unaware that Chief Sullivan was about to make an offer that would change her understanding of herself and her capabilities forever. In the distance, Roberto Martinez watched from his booth with a mixture of pride and apprehension, knowing that his daughter was experiencing something that would stay with her for the rest of her life, but not yet realizing just how profound that experience was about to become. Chief Sullivan made his decision with the same decisive clarity that had served him through countless combat operations. He looked at Emma, who was still examining the brass casing with fascination, and then at his rifle lying on the shooting mat beside them. What he was about to do went against every training manual and safety protocol he had ever learned, but sometimes exceptional circumstances called for exceptional actions. "Emma," he said quietly, drawing her attention away from the ammunition, "how would you like to try shooting?" The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Emma's eyes went wide with disbelief, while the gathered soldiers fell silent. Even his own team members looked stunned by the suggestion. In all their years of military service, none of them had ever seen a Navy SEAL offer his weapon to an 8-year-old civilian. I don't think I'm allowed," Emma stammered, glancing toward her father's booth. "I'm not old enough." "Age is just a number," Sullivan replied calmly. "What matters is whether you're ready to handle the responsibility. And from what I've seen this morning, you understand that responsibility better than some adults I've trained." Roberto Martinez was already moving toward them, having sensed something significant happening at the SEAL position. When he arrived and heard what Sullivan was proposing, his first instinct was absolute refusal. The liability issues alone were staggering, not to mention the safety concerns and the complete breach of standard operating procedures. "Chief, with all due respect, there's no way I can authorize that," Roberto said firmly. "She's 8 years old." "Sergeant, I understand your concerns," Sullivan replied. "But I've been training people to shoot for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone with her natural understanding of the fundamentals. She knows more about range safety than most recruits, and she's demonstrated better attention to detail than soldiers with years of experience." A crowd had gathered around them now, including several senior NCOs and even a few officers who had heard about the unusual situation developing on the range. The consensus was clear. What Sullivan was suggesting was impossible, impractical, and potentially dangerous. But Emma surprised everyone by speaking up in her clear, determined voice. "I understand guns are dangerous," she said, looking directly at her father. "I've watched hundreds of soldiers shoot, and I know all the safety rules. I know you never point the barrel at anything you don't want to destroy. I know you keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. I know you always treat the weapon as if it's loaded." Her recitation of the fundamental safety rules was perfect, delivered with the confidence of someone who had absorbed them through months of careful observation. More importantly, she seemed to understand the weight of what she was asking for, not treating it as a game or an exciting adventure, but as a serious responsibility. Chief Sullivan looked around at the assembled soldiers, then back at Roberto. "I'll take full responsibility," he said simply, "and I'll maintain complete control throughout. She won't touch the trigger until I'm absolutely certain she's ready." After a long moment of consideration, Roberto found himself nodding slowly. He had seen enough of Sullivan's reputation and expertise to trust his judgment, and he recognized that this was a moment that might never come again. "Full supervision," he said finally, "and we stop at the first sign of any problem." The next 30 minutes became the stuff of range legend. Sullivan spent an extraordinary amount of time positioning Emma properly, checking and rechecking every detail of her stance, grip, and sight alignment. His usually relaxed training demeanor was replaced by an intensity that reflected the unique nature of the situation. He was not just teaching someone to shoot, he was proving a point about capability and potential that had nothing to do with age or conventional expectations. Emma approached the training with the same serious focus she brought to her target-setting duties. She listened to every instruction with complete attention, asked clarifying questions when she wasn't certain about something, and followed every safety protocol with meticulous precision. When Sullivan finally positioned the rifle in her hands, supporting its weight while allowing her to feel the balance and control, she was as ready as any trainee he had ever worked with. The moment when Emma fired her first shot was one that every person on the range would remember for the rest of their lives. The crack of the rifle seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over the facility. Through the spotting scope, Sullivan watched as a perfect hole appeared in the target, just slightly left of center but well within what would be considered an excellent shot for any beginning marksman. "Outstanding," Sullivan said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "That was better than most soldiers do on their first attempt." Emma's face glowed with pride, but she maintained the serious demeanor she had shown throughout the training. She understood that she had just accomplished something extraordinary, but she also understood that it was the result of careful preparation and proper instruction, not luck or accident. Over the next few shots, with Sullivan's careful guidance, Emma continued to demonstrate remarkable natural ability. Her groups were tight, her improvement was rapid, and her adherence to safety protocols was absolute. More importantly, she seemed to understand intuitively the deeper principles that Sullivan had explained about breathing, relaxation, and mental focus. Word of what was happening spread beyond the immediate range facility. By the time Emma fired her final shot of the day, a crowd of over 50 military personnel had gathered to witness the unprecedented scene. Among them were colonels and command sergeant majors, special forces operators, and military police, all drawn by reports of a Navy SEAL teaching an 8-year-old girl to shoot with remarkable results. When the impromptu training session finally ended, Emma carefully helped Sullivan clean and secure his rifle, following the same detailed procedures she had observed him demonstrate. Her questions about maintenance and care showed the same thorough understanding that had characterized her approach to the shooting itself. As they walked back toward the rangemaster's booth, Sullivan realized that he had just witnessed something genuinely exceptional. Emma had not simply learned to shoot. She had demonstrated the kind of natural aptitude and mental discipline that marked truly gifted marksmen. More than that, she had shown the character and maturity to handle both the technical and emotional challenges of precision shooting with remarkable grace. Roberto Martinez watched his daughter approach with a mixture of amazement and concern, knowing that her life had just changed in ways that neither of them could fully comprehend yet. Emma had proven something to herself and to everyone who witnessed her performance, but with that proof came questions about what it meant and what responsibilities it might entail. Chief Sullivan shook hands formally with both Roberto and Emma, treating her with the same respect he would show any accomplished shooter. "You have a remarkable daughter, Sergeant," he said. "She has abilities that shouldn't be wasted." As the SEAL team prepared to leave the range, Sullivan handed Emma his card with his contact information. "If you ever decide you want to pursue competitive shooting," he told her, "there are people who should know about your abilities." That afternoon, as Emma and her father drove home from the range, both of them were quiet, processing what had just occurred. Emma stared out the window, replaying every moment of the morning, while Roberto considered the implications of his 8-year-old daughter demonstrating marksmanship skills that exceeded those of trained soldiers. The little girl who had started the day simply resetting targets had ended it by proving that exceptional ability could emerge from the most unexpected places. Her careful attention to detail, her respect for safety and procedure, and her natural understanding of the fundamentals had combined to create a performance that would be talked about on military ranges for years to come. More importantly, Emma had learned something about herself that would influence every challenge she would face in the years ahead. She had discovered that with proper preparation, careful instruction, and unwavering focus, she was capable of achieving things that others considered impossible. It was a lesson that would serve her well in whatever path her life might take.